Hi, good night. Crystal Serena here, and welcome back to the fourth segment of Meditate on It, where we are looking at Acts chapter 7. I am moving on to verse 34, where it speaks about Moses entering into a third installment of a 40-year cycle in his life. And I wanted to highlight that this should not be so much of a coincidence. This should not be a shocking moment, I should say, that, wow, the Lord judged Moses to spend another 40 years of his life in the wilderness. I want to highlight that this wilderness experience or spirit comes from abandonment. It comes from that abandoned spirit, that fissure in Moses' identity that followed him all of his life, that he did not come into a fullness of surrender and admission to true authentic sonship in Yahweh. So what operated in his first 40 years of his life that kept him from interacting with his fellow Israelites sent him into the land of Midian. And that same spirit also caused him to be in another form of wilderness in the desert and not enter into the promised land. Why am I saying this? Well, let's go back to where Moses first strikes down an Egyptian so as to avenge an oppressed man. Did the Lord instruct Moses to kill that Egyptian? We have no indication that the Lord told Moses to strike down an Egyptian. It seemed to me that Moses rose up in emotions in a temple that was not surrendered to Yahweh and brought about or attempted to bring about an avenging act and salvation to this oppressed Israelite. That rage is basically saying to God that my anger, my emotions are not subjected to your authority. And if we peel back the layers again, it's basically saying I am not self-controlled. I have not come into the fullness of the identity and the Spirit of God that says you can't have self-control. You can't submit unto my authority, the supreme authority of Yahweh. He operated in his own flesh and his own judgments as to how to handle that situation, that altercation. And time again, we see Moses deflecting. We see Moses going back into that state of relying on his emotion. That's what led him into exile in Midian. And that's what led him to strike the rock instead of speaking to it. It's what led him to breaking the 10 commandments on the tablets. When he discovered that the Israelites worshipped a golden calf. But you see, that frustration that Moses had with his fellow Israelites was really the frustration that he had on the inside with himself, All of the grumbles, that internal conflict, that inability to be decisive as to where my allegiance lies, or to be fully persuaded and convinced that he is a son of God, that continued to plague Moses in several instances. He lashed out on these fellow Israelites, but he failed to see. He had a blind spot that the same manner, the same abandoned, orphaned, rebellious nature that was in these Israelites that caused them to worship a golden calf and look towards Egypt again was also on the inside of him. You see, if you come into the fullness of your identity as a son of God, it's saying that all of my behavior, all of my thoughts, though you have given me responsibility, Lord, though you have given me authority, and you've given me leadership, all of this is still subjected to supreme authority. So I will not hasten to act out as if I am idolizing my own rage, my own temper. So there was never reconciliation of Moses' authentic identity and him being won over as a son of Yahweh internally. I mean, we saw this through his excuses when God called him. Moses knew that it was a call upon his life because he assumed that these people would understand that God would bring them deliverance through him. He had a measure of understanding, and he kept rejecting his true identity time and time again to the point where the Lord had to say, okay, well, I'll give Aaron as a form of support, or I'll send Aaron instead. You know, when the Lord really intended for Moses to step up as his son. That's what God wanted to know. Come into the fullness of your identity as my son. And he was running from that for years. So Moses' sentencing of another 40 years in the wilderness with these Israelites and not entering into the promised land of God was because of what Moses harbored on the inside. It was his judgment of vengeance, of frustration, of anger towards the Israelites rather than following the instructions of the Lord. What he judged, how he acted out to the Israelites was a form of judgment. And that same judgment is what came back upon himself. His own behavior and temperament, his own judgments towards the behavior and nature of those Israelites was the same judgment that he would have for himself based on the fissure that existed in his identity. So he more or less disqualified himself because he never got that full deliverance from an abandoned spirit. You know, that spirit is so disqualifying that when Moses was confronted with that question, who appointed you a ruler and a judge over us? Moses should have stood in his identity and say, hey, I am an appointed ruler. Yahweh appointed me, and I will do as he says to bring you into deliverance. But that spirit of false or counterfeit sonship, as well as the idolization of his temper, of his rage, of his own understanding of how to work out a conflict, is what caused him to flee. It made him feel guilty. It made him feel shamed. It made him feel as if he did not have a true allegiance. So he ran. There was a crater inside of him that made him very divided in his response. He could not fully say that he was Pharaoh's daughter's son because he killed an Egyptian. And because he killed an Egyptian,